Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Today, we are going to talk about the Mistborn Trilogy from Brandon Sanderson. And if you follow me on Twitter this weekend, or maybe it was late last week, I tweeted that I read the entire trilogy in 10 days. And I teased that could say more about what I thought of these books than any written review, and that's true. I mean, these are not small books, and I read them in 10 days. And the truth of that is, 3 of those days I was waiting on the trilogy to show up. I had read the first one. This is just called Mistborn, but I think it's actually supposed to be titled The Final Empire. I downloaded this from my local library and read it, and then I put the other 2 books on hold, only to realize the next day, or maybe it was the day after, that the library didn't even have these books available. So I quickly ordered the box set from Amazon so that I could finish reading it while I had this one on my mind, and I'm glad I did, because this has been the first thing I've read from Brandon Sanderson. I've always been a huge Wheel of Time fan, but I've never successfully finished that series. And Brandon Sanderson wrote the last few books in that series, so I wanted to kind of read something of his, and I had heard that this was a really good series. So I was excited to see that the first book, Mistborn, was in my library. I picked it up, I read it pretty quickly, and I found myself enjoying it. Now, I'm a pretty critical person, so as I was reading this book, I was a little lukewarm on it for quite a while. Even past the 2/3 mark, I was still kind of like, I'm not really certain. Like, Brandon's writing style is a little awkward sometimes. The characters are interesting, but they're also kind of not accomplishing anything. And I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to take away from this, other than there was a lot of mysteries being spun. Okay? So without getting spoilery, there's a good reason, and that's because this is really just one big book that's broken into 3. And I think that's the thing that makes most trilogies work, is that they really are the visual embodiment of a 3-act structure. We have setup, we have that weird middle part where a bunch of crazy stuff happens and our character fails horribly, and then we have the final act where the hero discovers the secret and does the thing. And within each of these individual books, there's also 3-act structure going on. So it's really like a 9-act book. And Brandon breaks this up into multiple sub-books, I guess, or parts he calls them, which also almost have their own 3-act structure built in. So there's a whole bunch of story in here. And I will say that I loved it. I thought it was a really fun read. There is a huge build-up. And in the first book, it's more or less like, let's get used to this character, let's get used to this weird magic system that is based on metals and how things are manipulated using metals, and it does a really good job of explaining it without over-explaining it. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times when a fantasy author is working towards building up a big epic world with a epic magic system with a whole bunch of intertwined things, it can be what some people call an information dump. Like, the author will have to inundate you with so much information just so you have an understanding of how it works that it can be overwhelming. In this particular book, the main character starts learning magic, or the main character is using magic. She doesn't know it, but she's using it from the very beginning, and you as the reader are kind of slowly introduced to the concepts as you need to know them. Instead of being thrown at it up front, and then later on you're like, what? As you need to know it, as the scenes progress and she starts using more and more in-depth skills and magics, then he explains those to you. And it was a really good way to do it. So by the end of book 1, you have a character who has done some subversion, has gone through some trials and tribulations, and has figured something out about herself, and they've set up a large goal, and it's basically a heist story I knew that before I started reading the books, and it kind of probably tainted my reading of the book a little bit, because the first third of this book leans really heavily into the whole heist genre with the crews and the plans and all of that stuff, but it very quickly leaves that all behind. It doesn't really stick too long in the standard Ocean's 11 hype, style of heist, and it doesn't have the I was secretly on his team while you were on that team, and we switched everything around and we didn't know it, and then in the end somebody walks out and we get to see everything play in reverse. That doesn't happen. But the opening setup is very much a heist story. They're going to steal something huge, right? And of course, in the end, they succeed at their heist. But what they've learned is that wasn't the real heist. The real heist happens in book 3, right? Like, the whole thing is a big heist story. And so then going into book 2, The Wells of Ascension, this is when they're starting to try to figure out, okay, what just happened? Because, we did something huge here, but it didn't solve all of our problems, right? And like any middle act, this is muddled. And I'm going to be honest with you here and say I didn't enjoy this book that much. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of good parts, but Brandon has said himself that he wanted to pack like a story that other authors might spend 10 books telling. He wanted to put all of that into 3. And the way he did that was just by having lots of storylines. And this book is just storyline after storyline after storyline. You've got like 10 different POVs running all over the world, doing all kinds of crazy things. And it's a little bit overwhelming, and quite honestly, he gave a lot of voice to some characters that I just did not care about, even after book 1. Like, I don't care about that guy. Why does he have a main story or a POV storyline running through this book? And by book 3, some of those storylines still didn't have a payoff. They were just kind of like, okay, did I really need to read all that exposition? So there's a lot in here. There's a lot in this book. But narratively, it does what a book 2 is supposed to do. It takes the premise that was set up in book 1 and says, whoa, what do we do now? Where do we go? And it takes you to a place that sets up book 3 perfectly without feeling like it didn't accomplish anything. I've read a lot of book 2s that don't accomplish anything. You just feel like, what did we learn here? We didn't really learn anything. We didn't really go anywhere. We really didn't do anything. Book 2 here, we learn a lot and we do a lot, and things happen and the plot progresses. It's not just muddling about, tinkering around. And then we get to book 3. Book 3 is like, hold on to the seat of your pants. We're going for a sprint, because we have all of these like 10 or 15 storylines now to resolve, and we also still have the major overarching storyline. Can we save everything? And it's a sprint to the finish. There's still some exposition in here that I feel like could have been left aside. Like, okay, there's still characters in here that at this point I'm like just tired of reading about them. I just don't care. And ultimately their storylines didn't have a very big impact. But I'm not upset that I read them. Like, it was essentially like getting some kind of free short stories peppered in throughout the narrative of this bigger story. So, it kept me stuck in the world of Mistborn and the weird creatures and fun things that happen on this world. But ultimately, did it serve the overall narrative? Maybe. I think the thing that you need to know about this, Brandon is a very good writer, like technical writer. His writing is very easy. It doesn't tax you. He's not using big sophisticated words. He's not using complex sentence structure. He's not overusing comparisons and metaphors and similes. He's not doing any of that stuff. He's writing clean, well-written English words that are quick on the page. He keeps character names pretty pronounceable. There's a few characters that I was kind of like, what? But for the most part, he's not using some weird fantasy naming system where you're like, I have no idea how to pronounce any of that. He keeps it very approachable. But he also has vast storylines being intermingled and twisted about so that you do have to pay attention. This isn't going to be a read where you just kind of mindlessly go through it. You're going to have to spend a lot of effort on it mentally, and I find that to be enjoyable. The ending of book 3 was perfect. Absolutely, I was really concerned with everything that was set up in book 2, even the stuff that was set up in book 1, and the first act of book 3, that setup. I was really concerned, like, can we actually get there? And I mean, I'm telling you, it doesn't actually get there until like the last fifth of the book, like the last 100 pages, 150 pages maybe, is when it really goes, oh, we're going to get there. And so for a lot of this book, you're like, there's no way we can get there. We spend a lot of this book on one thing that ultimately, I don't want to say does nothing, but ultimately was just a way to kind of stall, and it works. It works really well. It sets up the ending in a way that you are ready for the sprint, right? You're ready for the finale. And I think it worked out really well. If you're into fantasy, if you're into kind of epic high fantasy, I think this is a really good series. I'm excited to start on the next trilogy, and I think that Brandon has said there's a third trilogy set on the same world that it will follow eventually. So he's got 3 parts to this three-part. So we'll see. Mistborn Trilogy from Brandon Sanderson. Excellent. Excellent. I don't normally say that about a lot of things. I'm too critical sometimes. Highly recommended if you're into that. If you have any questions or if you want to talk about the books, let me know in the comments and we can have, like, further discussions. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is complacent. It's an adjective meaning agreeable and eager to please. Eleanor is far too complacent with common strangers. Complacent. C-O-M-P-L-A-I-S-A-N-T.